Welcome to our special education town hall. My name is Kylie and I will be your Zoom support for today. We have Lori Podvesker here who will be leading today's discussion. Just a little bit about Include NYC. For more than 3 decades, we've been helping young people with disabilities, their families, and professionals. We offer workshops, such as the one you're on today, a helpline, and a variety of resources. For those resources or to speak with our educator, you can use our Include NYC helpline in either English or Spanish or fill out our help request form on our website, and I'll drop that information in the chat box for you all. So I will pass it over to Lori to get us going.
Hi, everybody. Happy new school year. I hope everybody's summer went well. My name is Lori Podvesker, and I lead Include's policy work. I'm also a parent of an almost 19-year-old with developmental disabilities who attends a District 75 program on the Lower East Side. Okay, tonight we are gonna have a lot of fun, and I hope to answer as many questions as possible. And if I feel that the question is too individualized, I will follow up with people afterwards and not publicly. And I will answer questions that I believe others will benefit from the answer to. So if you have questions, you can drop them in the Q&A section like Kylie had mentioned, and I will try to answer as we go along. There's also a good possibility that I may not know the answer. Special education is a huge space, as you know. And if we don't know the answers, we could find them out. Kylie, you can go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. And so just a little bit about us. We are the Family and Community Engagement Center for all 5 boroughs and funded by the New York State Education Department to promote meaningful family involvement with the educational system. And we have grants to serve families with young people who have suspected or known disabilities from birth through 26, and through this funding through the State Education Department, we work with families of kids 0 through 5 and then school age 5 through 21. We also are part of the Parent Training and Information Center collaborative for all 5 boroughs that is supported by the federal U.S. Department of Education, as well as we receive money from them as a community parent resource center and work with families and schools in the South Bronx and other nonprofits in Northern Manhattan offering support and training to young people and organizations primarily for Spanish-speaking communities. And we are part of a project through the Federal Office of Rehabilitation called Real Transition Partners that helps us reach young adults as they're getting ready to transition from the school system into the adult world. We could go along to the next slide, please. And so these are just, this is just an overview of the people we connected and partnered with last year and some of our greatest hit topics that you could see through our helpline, which is where we provide one-on-one support for free. And some of the most popular workshop topics to the right. And last year we collaborated with almost 400 partners. We can go to the next slide, please. And this is just an overview of some of the things we do. The helpline I mentioned, we will put up the number at the end of this presentation, and we are able to help families who speak almost any language through a language access line that we use. We hold workshops mostly virtually still on all different topics that you could take a look at on our website. We have a couple of different projects that allows us to work directly with young people as they are either planning for life after high school or recently out of high school. And we assist young people with things as self-awareness, developing self-advocacy skills, accessing accessibility supports at college. We work closely with CUNY. We also hold events. Every year we do an event called College is Possible, in which we collaborate with CUNY and talk about what it's like to have a disability, going to a CUNY and disclosing that and getting supports and accommodations. We help access, we have a weekly email that goes out once a week with all different news. And if you look at our website, you can see other things we do, such as we hold support groups and we have resources online. But tonight, Kyla, you can go to the next slide, please. We are gonna talk about these things. And, you know, just wanna remind everyone that the information that I talk about tonight is what we know as of now, and that things will change because it's government, and I will try not to be too cynical. And, you know, as changes happen, they will be reflected in the work that we do together and to support one another. I talked about taking questions, and, you know, I just want to, before we start, remind everybody, and I'm going to say this with my parent hat on first and then my professional hat, that I urge any of you who are here as parents who may be feeling, you know, overwhelmed with the beginning of the school year. I know I've kind of have had it from a patient's perspective of all this unstructured time the last few weeks with no school. And, you know, at times I feel anxious and fearful in that parenting a child with a disability and navigating the education system here in the city is no joke. And it's universal, and that you're not alone, and that we're here, and that it gets easier as time goes on. And so I just want to remind you guys that. And, you know, someone once said something to me when Jack was very young, that's my son, which is to talk to myself like I would talk to my best friend and be compassionate. And so please keep that in mind. Okay, we're going to keep it moving. We can go to the next slide. So here are just some, you know, basic numbers about the city and students. And, you know, enrollment has dropped this year from last. It's actually dropped the last few years. And we used to have over 1 million students. And with the pandemic, we know that people left, and especially kids of younger ages. And, you know, right now we believe there are somewhere around 900,000 students in the system, 1,600 schools. You can see the charter school program numbers. Please go back to the data slide. Kylie, can you go back to the data slide? Thank you. And so there are over 300,000 students who receive special education services. And that's about 21% of the total population. You could see about 27% of kids with IEPs are also ELL students. We have 26,000 students who attend District 75 programs, which means that they are in highly segregated programs for their whole school day, and 26,000 preschoolers with IEPs. You know, before we move on, the significance of the enrollment number has to do with school budgets, and school budgets are often determined by the number of students who attend each school. And as many of you know, there has been an ongoing battle this year with the current administration and city council about budget cuts to the Department of Education for this fiscal year, which began July 1st. And I believe today, City Council passed a non-binding resolution asking for the mayor and the city to restore the cuts. And the cuts were anywhere from $250 to $500 million. And there's also a lawsuit going on. And what this means for families if these cuts stay in place is that each school will have less money, and that trickles down to less staff, less activities, and most importantly for our population, less providers possibly. Okay, we can go on to the next slide, please. And so I feel it's really important to address some of the systemic barriers that have long been in place. And some of them you will see are very basic. And as an advocate, feel that it's very important that we never lose sight of these things, because they will always be a challenge due to the size of the system and the structure. And so the quality of instruction always feels like we don't spend enough time focusing on that. And, we often lose sight on the equation of students with disabilities collectively making educational progress. We know that it's not equal throughout the city due to inequitable resources, due to student zip codes, and a need for a stronger accountability system to measure the extent in how our students are doing. And what I mean by that is independent of their individual progress based on their individual goals on their IEPs, collectively, are students graduating and things like that. And so access to quality instruction right now has been impacted by the pandemic due to a higher number of teachers retiring and having a serious shortage right now of qualified special education teachers and related service providers, and especially bilingual. And access to quality and timely evaluations has always been an issue. In fact, there still is a lawsuit in place known as Jose P. And I encourage everyone to Google that. This has been ongoing for decades and has to do with the timeline set in place by the federal special education law, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that the city has a certain amount of time to conduct an evaluation and hold a meeting to discuss the results. Last year, based on data from the Department of Education known as Local Law 27, only 81% of IEP evaluations were completed within the legally required 60-day timeline. We also know that last year, about 25,000 students didn't receive any or all of their mandated special ed related services, and a lot of that had to do with the pandemic, and a lot of it did not. Last year, we know that there were issues with special education recovery services, and that was the city's response to providing additional special education services that are documented on students' IEPs last year. It was supposed to roll out in September, didn't begin until December. They weren't held in person, the majority of them. A lot of families opted out. And so we know it was underutilized. Transportation has always been a big issue, and I'm focusing on it systemically within this slide. And what issues I think we need to spend some time focusing on. When I say we, I'm talking about within the advocacy community, has to do with the number of schools students attend that are on each bus, which bleeds into different school schedules and students arriving early at school and maybe becoming agitated sitting on the bus for 40 minutes before school begins. And at the end of the day, too many students leave their school buildings early so their buses can go to other schools and pick up students, and therefore missing instruction and related service providers. Also, the Chancellor's regulations for transportation have not been updated for 30 some odd years. And the Chancellor's regulations outline policies and procedures for traditional public schools, which means it does not include charter schools. Least restrictive environment, on every IEP, there's a least restrictive environment statement and section. And systemically, we know, due to the rigidity of the continuum, which is, the location of where a student receives special education supports and services and programs, that too many of our students are not accessing general education students and curriculum and are in segregated settings. Last year, nearly 52,000 students spent the majority of their school days with other students with disabilities, and no time with non-disabled students, with general education students. The system as a whole needs to have an accountability tool that measures the extent that students with disabilities are integrated with general education students. And it's not just academics or programmatic. It could include lunch, arts, music, after school programs, because we know that many of our students gain skills, soft skills, as a result of interacting with non-disabled students, and that leads to employment after school and independence. We know that timely and accessible information for parents has been a huge issue, citywide and school-based, and that also includes parents who don't speak English having access to timely information in their native language. We can go to the next slide, please. So the effects of the pandemic. We know that the pandemic widened the achievement gap between general education students and students with disabilities. Last week or this week, the NA, which is the National Association of Educational Progress, released test scores throughout the country. This organization is also known as the nation's report card, and every group of students had a drop in their scores in math and English, but students with disabilities dropped the most. The average score was 234, and for our kids it was at 206, and right above it are English language learners, which is no surprise. The overall ability for students with disabilities to access curriculum during the pandemic and post system-wide closure, for almost 2.5 years, really caused some students to regress, other students to become stunted, and they remained where they were for a long period of time. It impacted, social and emotional learning for all students, including ours. And, it means that for many students, not only did they regress, but it means that they didn't progress with the development and process that kids gain at school, on attitudes to develop healthy identities, to manage emotions, to achieve personal and collective goals. and, relationally, how to be empathetic and how to be supportive. And we all know for our kids that sometimes communicating or socializing is more challenging. Mental health, nationally, we are in a mental health crisis with young people, and there has been a big uptick in students who now have anxiety disorders, may be depressed, may have developed other mental health issues. And for transition age students, and these are students who are 14 and older, we know that many of the activities that they were able to take part of prior to the pandemic came to a halt during that time, and really impacted the ability for them to practice skills that lead to employment, opportunities such as internships. And many schools didn't have the capacity naturally and respectfully to focus on these activities. And thank goodness there was a big push from electeds to get legislation passed in the state legislature. And now students throughout the state who turned 21 during the pandemic and in the last year may be eligible to stay for another year or two. I'm going to pause for a second and look at the Q&A section. I want to say it's kind of wild in this format. It's been a while. I'm going to take 1 minute just to scan these. Somebody asked if there are programs for transportation training for students with disabilities challenged in using the subway independently. Yes, that is called travel training, and it is housed, I believe, under District 75. If you go to the New York City Department of Education's website and you search for travel training, you should be able to find that. Also, you can call us and we will help connect you with the coordinators for that. Somebody asked a question about placement, which I'm going to get to. Someone is asking about schools and the best schools, and want to remind everybody that every child has unique needs just like we do as adults, and there's no way for us to tell you what is best. It is all contingent on what each child needs. I will say there are some listservs where families can get information from other families, and depending on what the IEP recommendation is, if it's for a District 75 placement, a parent can always call a borough placement officer for District 75 to ask questions about schools and to share what their child is like and what their needs are, to see if there is a program that closely aligns with those needs. There's another question here about behavior therapy. This is very hard and nuanced, and I ask that person who put that question out there to contact us on our helpline. There are lots of factors that weigh into that, including the age of the child, the availability of therapists, and most importantly, funding. How behavioral support will be paid for. And if it's in the school system, we should talk. Okay, I am going to scan for 2 more minutes. Yes, somebody asked about recovery services last year. Will they be offered again this year? Yes, we're going to talk about that. There's a question here about kindergarten and busing, and we're going to talk about that too. Section 504. Okay. Kylie, we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what is special education going to look like this year? And you know, the city has put in a lot of money in this year's budget for new literacy initiatives, and the mayor has promised, and the chancellor, for more of our kids to be literate, and there'll be dyslexia screenings for all students in elementary schools. There'll be mandated trainings for teachers by 2023. Every teacher will have to have at least 2 hours of training of what characteristics of a student with dyslexia look like. And we are seeing a new literacy, new phonics-based curriculum introduced in schools, as well as literacy coaches for every school. This coming school year, unlike last year, the city is not going to offer special education recovery services for all students who have IEPs. Last year, it was completely underutilized, like I had mentioned before, but these services were offered to all students, and that won't be the case for this year. This coming school year, schools and IEP teams will be required to determine if gaps for individual students still remain right now, and they will be addressed at annual IEP meetings, or if a family or school had initiated an evaluation, they will be discussed at meetings to discuss the results of those. And part of the problem with this is that many annual reviews for students don't happen until the spring. The city just released guidance for schools last year on determining if a student should get compensatory services, and that will happen at IEP meetings. And compensatory services is a legal remedy through the federal special education law that provides services that were missed to be made up. Special education recovery services are additional services that the city is using money from the different stimulus packages from the American Recovery Act in response to the pandemic to provide additional services that are already on a student's IEP. And it can be tricky because students aren't entitled to those services the same way that they are entitled to the services that they receive now. So students aren't entitled to receive additional services, but as we all know, the city is legally required to provide existing mandated services. It can be tricky. And so during IEP meetings, when teams are determining if a student should receive additional recovery and compensatory services, they are going to focus on the time period of March 2020 and August 21. And so the conversation is going to be required for teams to have, whether a parent has initiated this conversation or not. It doesn't mean that a parent or school could request an IEP meeting at any time to determine if this should happen, because they can, and cannot emphasize that enough to everyone listening. If you believe your child you know, is still recovering and still needs additional services, you 100% can call us. We can help you through that process of initiating that conversation, or you can talk to your child's teacher. You can talk to someone at your child's school. And Kylie just put our helpline information number if that is something you want to pursue. But there are some questions that folks are going to ask to make these determinations. And some of them may include, for how long did the student receive blended or fully remote learning? To what extent was the student provided instructions or services and a learning modality other than full in-person instruction? What documentation was there to demonstrate that the student benefited from instruction, and was the student engaged and able to access instruction and services? Everybody had a different experience, yet a lot of our kids had similar experiences where they could not access it. You know, and if you have notes or emails or any other documentation that substantiates this, and you feel that your child still should get additional services, that is something that you want to provide at meetings to show. There are many other questions that could be asked. You know, what benefits did the student receive from any recovery services that have already been provided? Could identify areas of need be addressed by these services, or does a reevaluation have to happen? Families have the right to pursue due process at any time. And due process means that a family is legally challenging IEP recommendations, which could include a team believing that a student doesn't need recovery services or compensatory services. And there are a few different ways that due process can be pursued. One of them is mediation. And mediation is something that we at Include encourage families to think about because it allows an independent person who is skilled and knowledgeable to a mediator to hear all sides of the story, a family's circumstances, a school's perspective. It's voluntary. The mediator leads the meeting. And in addition to seeking mediation, a family can simultaneously file for an impartial hearing, which is a legal proceeding. There is a hearing officer in charge. A written decision is made. And I do want to acknowledge that in some ways I'm oversimplifying these things due to time, and that they can be timely and emotionally challenging. They could be expensive if a family pursues representation from an attorney. There are also places where families can seek legal assistance at no cost or low cost. Some of the organizations that do this work that we know of are places like Advocates for Children, Legal Aid Society, Fordham Law School has an education clinic. Call us and we could help you more with that. And there are also complaints that could be filed with the New York State Education Department, which has to do with really like if it's impacts, the issue is impacting more than one student. It could be school-based, it could be systemic. And the state has the ability to order the Department of Education to make up services. And that is something that families can find more information about on the State Education Department's website, or you can call us. I'm going to pause and look at the Q&A again. Somebody asked what are some examples of compensatory services, and compensatory services, again, are when a legal process has played out and the IEP team has determined that they did not provide, a school did not provide what is on a child's IEP, and everyone is in agreement for these services to be made up. And the compensatory services would mirror what is listed on a child's IEP. Somebody asked a question about a para for kindergarten or a skilled nurse. And that is something that is nuanced, and the answer is yes. It is not easy, and that is something that would be a good thing to call our helpline with, because there are many variables that play into that. I'm going to look at the chat for a minute. Okay, we're good. Kylie, we can go to the next slide, please. So the old transportation, and so there are a couple different places where we can find a student's information for busing. First and foremost, the DOE has updated their website, and if you go to their website and search busing, or the Office of Pupil Transportation, OPT, you could find that information. And also the school account, there is the New York City school account, which is an online application that focuses on individual students. So if you are a parent of a child in a traditional public school, if you haven't already, you can register for an account by either contacting your child's school, or you can go online and ask for a code. They give you a temporary password for you to access it. You could even contact your child's school and make an appointment to go in for them to help you. And that is an excellent place to get all kind of information about your child, including their grades, their student history, IEPs, and the IEP section will say what related services they should get, and busing, and the information that is there on busing will include, what kind of service your child gets. For students with specialized transportation, it's door to door, whether there's vehicle modifications, whether there's time limits, the date range of when busing begins and when it ends. If a child has alternate drop-off locations on certain days of the week, it'll be listed there. It'll have the address of the pickup and drop-off locations. It'll have the bus company name, and it will have the phone number of the bus company. Reimbursement the DOE will reimburse the cost of transportation if a child meets the eligibility requirements for reimbursement up to $200 a day, $100 a trip. The DOE will not reimburse tips or if a student is a no-show for when a bus shows up. There's also an email address that people can reach out to when they have questions, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now. And also online, you could find forms for reimbursement. Some of the eligibility requirements include students in temporary housing who have busing service, student in foster care that have busing service, students transferred from temporary housing to permanent housing. And some of the places where the DOE is reimbursing could include, for hire rides such as Lyft and Uber. It also could include families taking, if they live up north in the Bronx and their child attends school, lower Manhattan or Brooklyn or even Staten Island, they can be reimbursed for the Metro North. Forms can be found and submitted online. And if you can't find them, you can reach out to us and or you can ask your child's school to help you fill those forms out and submit them. When to contact your child's school or bus company, you can contact your child's school. Every school has a coordinator for busing. And if you're not sure who that is, you can ask the parent coordinator if your child is younger, and or you can ask anybody in your child's school in the front office. If there isn't parent coordinator, in like a high school. And you should contact them if your child's school bus is repeatedly late or not showing up. If you're having problems with your child's current bus. And when I say problems, as a parent of an almost 20-year-old, I'm not sure whether I become desensitized or more empathetic. Oh no, help me. But I know, based on experience in years past, that it's highly likely it's going to take a week or 2 weeks or even 3 weeks for a steady schedule to get set in place in terms of the time of when the bus will be picking our guy up in the morning. There's lots of contingencies during the first few weeks. Students change schools, students, bus routes change. The reality is that the bus drivers and the buses don't have to wait too long for kids to come out. And if they show up at different times, it's very hard, as we know as parents, when we should be expecting them to come. We're also going to have, before I forget, a workshop on September 15th where you can get a lot more information on things like what is the legal amount of time that a school-age student with a disability can be on a bus for, a preschooler with a disability. I think they increased the time this year so they can be on the bus longer. And all busing related questions will be addressed there, and it'll be led by my busing guru colleague, Ruth DeRoma. And so other places that you can reach out to when there are problems are the bus company themselves. But I will say from my experience that, bus companies often don't know how to resolve routing situations, or don't have the ability to do that. So sometimes it's best to call your child's school, also to call the bus company at the same time, and or you can always file a complaint with the Office of Pupil Transportation. There's a phone number listed here. There's also an email address that I can't find, but you can reach out to our helpline or come to our workshop on September 15th to get that email address. And when you do call OPT to file a complaint, they are going to give you a reference number, and you want to write that down so you could follow up on it if it hasn't been resolved in a timely manner. On the DOE's website, there's now a family guide on busing, and you can find a lot of information about it there. We can go on to the next slide, please. So Section 504, accommodations at schools are coordinated by the Section 504 coordinator at the school. Every school is required to have one. And for this year, every school must appoint a person by September 12th. So reach out to your child's school if your child has a Section 504 and those supports and services are not in place, or if you have questions. Often families have to submit health forms, and you want to be proactive about that. And it's also good to know who that person is. And so IEPs with placement issues, and that has to do with the location of where services are delivered, and placement recommendations. And when there are problems or issues contingent on the age of the child, there are certain rights that families have. And that includes, sorry, I just lost my place. Oh my goodness. So sorry, guys. I somehow erased my notes. Okay. So when there are placement issues, right? And an example of that could be if your child has a recommendation for a special class or self-contained class, which means that there are only students with IEPs in it on their IEP, but the school says that they can't provide that program. You want to talk to the school first. If the school you are offered says they don't have the program on your child's IEP, you also want to talk to that school first. And if you can't resolve it with the school, and when I say school, I'm talking for the most part schools that are district schools, which have to do with districts 1 through 32 and not district 75 schools. You can first go to the recommended school, and you can also escalate it from there by going to the superintendent's office, the district superintendent's office. You can write to Central, and I'm going to give you the email address right now. You could reach out to us and we could help you. And the DOE should work with the school to create the program or offer a different school. Your child has a right to attend a school that has the program on their IEP the first day of school. We know this doesn't always happen, but again, they have that right. And so there are different ways that you can try to resolve that before pursuing due process. For when there are issues around placement for preschool students, such as there is no placement, there has been no recommendation made, or there's no availability for a preschool student with a disability. If it's for related services only, you can contact the Office of Enrollment or email. This is for preschoolers. When preschoolers with placement issues, call the number here, or you can email. And when it has to do with the class and not just related services, you want to contact the CPSE, and those are the committees for preschool special ed. And I'm going to give you a link for those right now, CPSCs. And again, there are a lot of variables that play into this, but your child has the right to receive the placement and the services documented on their IEP. For language access, actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to back up for a second. When there is no placement for students in District 1 through 32 schools, again, non-District 75 schools, families can reach out to and go to, actually, the Family Welcome Centers. The DOE has created temporary family welcome centers for the beginning of the school year, and they will remain open until September 16th. And then starting September 19th, which is a Monday, the family welcome centers will return to their usual sites. So the link that I just shared will show you the locations of the family welcome centers that are temporarily in place right now to help families deal with back to school related issues. For District 75 families in which there is no placement offer in place right now, there is both an email address and a phone number that families can reach out to. And I just put that information in the chat too. Okay. For language access, and that has to do, what families' rights are for this. There is a chancellor regulation that outlines this all, which is A663. Parents have the right to get documents translated, including report cards and anything related to special education, including IEPs, prior written notices, which are the notifications families get about IEP meetings or any changes being suggested or made to IEPs in their language. They also have the right, parents, to have interpretation services at school meetings and events. We know that there are, let me say that a different way. We know that we need more bilingual programs for students with disabilities, and that bilingual special education classes are limited. Some students may get an alternate placement or a language para to help them in the interim. There is an email address that families can reach out to related to programs. When there are problems with translation and interpretation at schools, the DOE has a complaint line. And guess what? They also have an email address that I just dropped in here. And so lastly, resolving problems and escalating them can be intimidating, yet necessary. And we feel that it's always best by starting with your child's school. It's been my experience, it's always best to work with what you have. And a lot of advocacy has to do with communication skills and relationships. And the beginning of the school year, like now, is the perfect time to establish that. And, that can look like not waiting for parent-teacher conferences to happen and proactively reaching out to your child's teacher or teachers to introduce yourself, maybe introduce, who your child is, a few sentences about what they're like and, what may work, what may not work, asking your child's teachers what's the best way to communicate with them. Do they prefer texting, email, phone calls at certain times? And related service providers, the same goes for them too. Everybody should receive notification on who their child's teacher and related service coordinators are. I'm sorry, the related service providers are. It doesn't mean that it happens for lots of reasons. There's shortages, and we know that's going to happen. And so if that's the case, where you don't receive a notice, I would reach out to your child's teachers right away. If things don't get resolved at the school level, families can always reach out to the family support coordinator or the district family advocate within the district superintendent office. The city just announced last week that they are taking 1,000 employees who have worked in central or within the early childhood division and reassigning them to district superintendent's offices so they can provide schools with direct support. Hopefully this will help resolve issues like the ones that we just discussed. We'll have to wait to see how that plays out. And families can always call or contact the central office or call 311, which isn't necessarily the best because typically it gets kicked back to the Office of Specialized Instruction, which is the Office of Special Ed within the Department of Education. But here is the number for Central, as well as the email address. If you do reach out to any of these email addresses, just be mindful that there's 300,000 students who receive services in the system, that it may take a couple of days. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow up, that you shouldn't put pressure on them, but just be mindful that it takes time for things to get resolved. We have a few more minutes. I'm gonna scan the Q&A, but Kylie, in the interim, can you please go to the next slide, which should have our helpline information? There it is. Okay, let me look.
I'm also going to just drop our evaluation poll in the meantime so people can fill that out as you're scanning questions.
Yes. Okay, so home instruction. I see the question from Aurora. Aurora, reach out to our helpline, please. If a student is not making progress in school in the District 75 program is inappropriate. How does a parent get a deferral to CBST for a non-public school program? So that is a huge question. And the way that it would legally be framed would be that a child is not receiving an appropriate education in their least restrictive environment, which has to do with the placement. And, you know, the question here asks, how does a parent get a deferral to CPST for an NPS program? That is a process. And again, there is no universal answer to that. There are lots of variables, and it has to be proved that progress hasn't been made. You know, some of the factors that play into that is, have all services been provided? And also, you know, why isn't the District 75 program appropriate? Students are not entitled to the best programs or the best services. They're entitled to appropriate, which means individualized based on the results of evaluations. And sometimes kids aren't in an appropriate placement because there has not been a recent evaluation. Old information is being used. So that is a question that needs to be pursued. Someone asks a question for assistive technology and how to get that. First thing to do is to write a request for an assistive technology evaluation in writing, and we can help you formulate what that letter looks like, but you would want to state in, you know, 1 to 3 sentences why you believe your child needs assistive technology, and contingent on where they go to school will determine who will do the evaluation. And that is definitely something we can help you figure out. Somebody asked a question about rights for a child who is receiving homeschool instruction and receiving related services. They have the same rights to those services at home as they do in school. The hardest thing about that is finding providers. It doesn't mean that the DOE is absolved from providing that, but that is often the case. And again, I'm going to ask whoever asked that question to reach out to our helpline, because there are certain things that you could do to help with that. And we could explain more. Sometimes a voucher or an RSA or independent providers, going through those lists can help. Somebody asked a question about providers and how to advocate as a parent to get the appropriate provider in place. There's no simple answer to that either, right? It all depends what is considered to be appropriate and inappropriate. If, you know, the chemistry isn't there, it doesn't mean that a child is entitled to another provider. If appropriate in this context means something like your child is receiving assistive technology services, but it's being provided by a physical therapist, and there is a disconnect between, you know, literacy and this device that the physical therapist doesn't have the formal training or skill set to address, then that would be something inappropriate. So there's lots of variables there. I think I hit most of the questions as best as possible. We've run out of time. I hope this was helpful to everyone. There's lots of information, and, you know, want to again encourage all of you to keep your head up and to reach out to us if needed. We have a lot of great resources on our website in both English and Spanish. To look at our website, at our calendar for upcoming events. And if you need, thought partners to listen and to weigh in, we're here to help. Okay, everyone, thank you so much, and have a great week and beginning to the school year, and you're not alone. Thanks.